Meet Adriano Del Monte. Born from Australia, Adriano grew up inspired by football media. After moving to Europe in his early 20s, he started working with nearly every sports network and has even interviewed hundreds of elite footballers along the way, including Messi, Modric, Mourinho, just to name a few.
The Atletico manager, Diego Simeone, literally punched a wall.
But how did Adriano find success?
Sport never sleeps, it never stops.
And so, in this episode, we dive deep into the changes of football culture, the rigors of UEFA's schedule, and finally the grind of TV presenting. What was life like growing up for you?
I'm originally from Australia. I was very active in sports, and it was more about testing the waters and trialing everything there was to have a go at.
You went to the University of Melbourne and the National Institute of Dramatic Art. What was your experience at each one?
My studies were directly related to work that I do today. You take different things away from the education side, but ultimately it has been all about the on-site work experience, and there's no amount of study you can do that can compare to actually getting physical experience.
From 2007 to 10, you worked with Goal, Skysports, ESPN, and The Guardian in England. As you look back, what did it look like in the earliest years of working as a football journalist?
When I was in high school, I understood the work experience was the key. Goal.com was my first ever job while I was still studying in Australia. Often late nights, early mornings, covering live matches, really made me understand the demands of sport never sleeps, it never stops. Somewhere I was working with the Goal.com, now moved to ESPN SoccerNet, which was the old ESPN FC back in the day. My dreams were to work in TV. I thought to myself, if I go to the UK, maybe I can learn more about how television works. And I spent 6 months with ESPN, with Sky Sports, with The Guardian as an intern, and got some really hands-on experience, but most importantly, learned how it worked and met the right people. And some of those contacts are still helping me to this day.
And was there any good stories in the early years?
They're not really cool memories, but waking up at 4 a.m. in Australia, because that's what time we have to wake up to watch the sport. It used to be text commentary where I'd wake up and it's a big match in Italy and I'd live commentate in text, which used to be quite popular. I remember consuming that as a football fan, but eventually watching Juventus Roma in Torino, and I'd write an article on what I'm watching. Those surreal feelings, because it was so fresh, raw and new, so overwhelming, but it was what I wanted, that level of pressure.
Then you started working as a radio host for SEN Sport. How did you provide football coverage at a time when social media today isn't like what it was 10 years ago?
I was very strong at writing, but radio was the biggest test, because when you're on radio, unlike on television, you only have your voice. You need to tell a story. You need to be direct, you need to be sharp, clear, confident, engaging. I actually launched a company in Australia at that time, which I called Soccer Anchor. It was only a decade or so ago, but it was so before its time that it became semi-popular. If I just decided to keep doing that for 4 or 5 extra years, I've got no doubt that would have absolutely taken off to another level. But having that mindset to think outside the square, do something different that others aren't doing, separates you from the rest, which I always encourage young people to do these days. And that was my mentality behind pursuing the company and a website. I had a team working underneath, and it was just strengthening those skills in terms of how can I make myself better.
During the 2014 World Cup, what did a typical day look like when you were covering the matches during that time?
I managed to get myself into beIN Sports USA, which was yet to launch in 2012. And I did a screen test with them, which was essentially a mock test. I was in the US for a couple of weeks. I went down to Miami for the day. They saw my work and they said they'll be in touch. At the same time came the World Cup. I was easily able to get to Brazil. And it was just seeing how it works. Regular days certainly wasn't anything too overwhelming, too demanding, because there was a lot of fun and enjoyment in the tournament. I've always been a big believer in investing in your time to learn. And that doesn't mean education, academic wise. See the world, spend time in different places, and that ultimately will make you a better individual.
I know you just mentioned beIN Sports, so you started working with them in Qatar. Did you feel like you had the freedom to kind of express what you wanted to in terms of interest, or did you find it more structured in it's like you have to cover X, Y, and Z topics?
Every network will differ depending on what broadcast rights they had. I was in Doha, Qatar, new country, new culture, new everything. I was out there by myself. There was very little freedom where I was doing, as you said, basketball, football, motorsport, tennis, all sorts of sports. It wasn't too much of an issue, but working in that was all new. So it was really demanding because you have to work under stress. You don't have time to really deal with anything but what you can control. job.
What was it like to cover the 2017 Australian Open? You got to speak with Serena and Venus and cover them. I know you mentioned the word surreal earlier. Did it feel surreal considering you're an Australian?
2017 Australian Open was the very first tournament that I covered on the ground, and that year was incredible, both the men's and the women's. The men's final was Federer and Nadal. The women's final was Serena against Venus. Incredible how it turned out. In the end, we found out a few weeks later she was pregnant during that match. It's one of the coolest tournaments I've ever covered in any sport, purely because I was inexperienced relatively at that time. I had Serena moments after she won, and it was just such a unique experience. I just enjoyed that pressure, that demand, and you feel at home.
What challenges did you face when you started working with Fox as a presenter? That was the COVID-19 pandemic. How did that impact the world of media and presenting for you?
With the COVID pandemic, it was incredibly difficult for everyone, and especially I was here in Milan. And if you recall, Milan was the hardest hit city initially in the Western world. It was bizarre to be a part of. It was like the world was watching a movie happening in Milan. It was very strange. The contracts that I had at that time with some of my broadcasts, Fox in Asia being one, SuperSport in Africa being the other, and things were going well. But when COVID came, everything changed. I immediately became a COVID reporter. It was just being open and being ready for change, and I was very quickly able to adapt. Since COVID, nothing has stopped. It was just another hurdle, but it was a very positive moment in my career.
How does it feel to cover the UEFA competitions and the Champions League? Do you feel more confident because of your experience, or do you still feel a little bit intimidated because you're surrounded by all these people that you highly respect?
Intimidation is something I've never struggled with. Even some of the top players I work with, I don't ever feel any less off than they are. I admire and I respect to the highest extent. My approach has made relations I have with top footballers very strong. When I work at Champions League, it's just another game, and that's how everything I do is. I've been very fortunate to host some big events for UEFA and FIFA, and I don't think who's on the other side watching. We're having a chat now, people will watch, but I'm not thinking about them. I'm just thinking about the conversation that you and I are having. And I do the same whether I'm sitting right here or whether I'm pitch side at the Bernabeu in Madrid. It's the same. Tell the public what I know. Don't try to be anyone I'm not. Share what I can share. Do my best. Have a smile on my face and have a good time. And that's my approach to everything I do. I don't overstress. I don't overthink. If I maintain that approach when there's no time to think, I'm always ready because I can't do anything more than what I can control.
What does a typical day look like for you? Does it just depend on the year, the competitions, the traveling, the weeks, the day?
Yeah, it depends on the day. I work for 7 different TV networks into 5 continents, a couple of organizations. I work for AC Milan. There's no routine, and that's a really difficult part of my job that no one sees. I've had days where I literally did not have time to sit down for a meal for 36 hours. It's hard. I did 2 matches in 24 hours in Madrid. I did 3 matches in 48 hours in 3 cities. It sometimes feels like it never ends. You have 3 in 48 hours. You have 2 in a day. It's nothing more important than one's health. So it's finding that balance. I've also had days in 2 different countries and had 15 minutes of sleep. Last year, the Champions League final was in Istanbul. The Roland Garros men's final was in Paris. It's so intense at times. The mindset has to be ready for anything. Typical week is dictated by the schedule of matches as a start, but the schedule of matches or the network I work for don't confirm which game they want me at until very close to the time. So it's always very difficult. You have to consume Italian football where I live. I have to consume other leagues as well to make sure I'm across the other top clubs. So there's really never a break because you never know when that next opportunity is around the corner.
Out of all the people that you've met and interviewed, who stands out as someone you just can't forget?
An individual I've always really admired in the football world is Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and I've had a lot more to do with him in recent years with AC Milan. But even as a kid growing up, following him, his mindset, I've always enjoyed just the mental grit and determination of the individual who's confident within himself. Maybe to some he comes across as a bit overconfident, but to me, it's just the sheer willingness and confidence to be the best version he can be. He didn't have an easy upbringing. He's made it to the top of his field. He's loved and adored by his teammates. That's what I've always aspired to do. I love working in a team. When I do my job well, it makes their lives easier. I just love contributing to the bigger picture. I've always been really inspired by Zlatan and been able to share some really nice moments where there's a character, given his mindset, probably top of the list.
How does football culture change from country to country? I mean, you've been to Italy, Brazil, America, Qatar. And then also, what are your thoughts about the 2026 World Cup that's coming to America?
The honest truth is that after doing 5-6 years of countless matches, 100 matches per year, they become a bit the same. But what I've never lost is what football means to people. Football here in Italy is a religion. Where I come from in Australia, football is just another sport. It's very different. Football here in Italy is a core of one's identity, and there is so much beauty in it. Even the smallest of towns, that there are millions of untold stories. It's something I'm always inspired by. How does it differ in Europe? Obviously, some enjoy football in a more passionate way. Italian fandom is right up there with the very best. German football fandom, unbelievable. Turkish, incredible. Some of the loudest things I've ever heard have been these stadiums. And not as a result of what I see on the pitch, it's what I see off the pitch. But it's changing. I've spent a lot of time in the US. It's starting to become a real product that the generations coming through now are really appreciate. Looking forward, I'm really excited to see, because I just experienced this in Australia with the Women's World Cup. What sports fans' reaction will be to the World Cup will be phenomenal. Club fandom is one thing. In some of the more passionate countries, the club is preferred to the country, but country fandom is unlike anything else that can unite an entire country. I've seen it in Italy, I've seen it in Australia. It is magical to watch. And if the US men's team can have some success, what it could do for that sport going forward, what it could do for kids and their desire to play and get involved, I'm a little scared to see, but I'm excited for you guys for sure.
How do you think football media is going to change in the future? With all these different streaming platforms, Peacock, the Premier League, MLS with Apple TV, Paramount Plus, Champions League, all these different types, ESPN Plus. How will these streaming platforms change? Is it just going to be more social media based?
In the future, leagues will own their rights and it will be subscription based, a bit like the NBA. NBA League Pass, one of the best products in the world. And I feel that football will eventually go down that path, because at the present time, you've just mentioned 3 different platforms there. In Australia, there are 4 or 5. It's too much. There are too many. And as a result, you're not really growing the sport. And into markets like Australia and the US, where the sport's still growing, in my opinion, there has to be a home for it. Growing up in Australia, we had one network that had the major leagues. So even if you weren't a big fan of the sport, if it was on, you could watch it. Now, if you've got a friend who's an NBA and NFL fan, they're not going to get into Champions League unless they have the Paramount subscription. You cannot grow the subscriber base and draw new fans in. Something has to change if they really want to see growth of the sport. And this is where I think in the US, the World Cup in 26 will make maybe those with some cash investors open their eyes to think, okay, if we start to invest properly here, they will come. Then we can go to subscriptions down the track. But I think it could be a major turning point for the US.
When interviewing an athlete or coach after a match, what are you searching to understand?
Just respect their time and not annoy them. I think it's one of my least favorite things to do. Pre-match or post-match interviews then and there on the spot. There are pressures of you don't want to say the wrong thing. I'm not trying to be friends with everyone, but I'm also not trying to get that scoop or that quote or that headline to write a story. I want to respect the emotion, particularly if a player loses. I don't want to come in with hard-hitting questions. My first question is always a general, what is your assessment of what just took place? And I'll frame it either way, whether they won or they lost. In doing so, I get a gauge immediately on how annoyed are they, how happy are they, how open are they, and if they give me a bit, which often they do, then we can be a bit more specific about a key moment where perhaps there was an error. But otherwise, I tend to respect the person first and then think as a journalist. Often working in TV, we interview the players immediately, either on the pitch or as soon as they come off the pitch. Emotions are running high. I was at a match during the week, Atletico Madrid, Borussia Dortmund did in Spain, and the Atletico manager, Diego Simeone, came off the match livid, literally punched a wall a couple of meters from where I was standing because his team were in full control. They were winning comfortably. They did miss a couple of opportunities and they conceded very late. 2-1 had finished. It was a missed opportunity to end the tie, basically.
What are 3 skills you think someone needs to be a really good TV presenter?
The mindset is the most important. In any industry you move into, there's no roadmap for how life plays out. But do not focus on a destination. Focus on the journey. I never have set goals for myself. I just took what came. I wasn't so focused that I have to host this event, and if I don't, then no. Because if I was so narrow-minded, I must do this, maybe I'd miss the opportunities that came on the left side and the right side. being present and having that strength of mind that the journey is the focus is super important. It allows you to be calm, be willing to learn. And I think it just maintains a level of humility. I think constructive criticism and feedback is a very important skill. I think you can never be so sure of yourself you can't learn something from everyone else. We're talking about the skill set. You need to remain open, because if you're not open, if you're not vulnerable, you cannot deliver as a presenter. When we talk about the craft, I think confidence is ultimately what it comes down to. I talk about being sure that you've put the work in. Any sports person, male, female, whatever sport they do, they're the best at what they do because they know they're the best at what they do. They're not shouting that out all the time. They know they're there for a reason, but it's because they put the work in. No one knows what I sacrificed, but I know. The fact that I know makes me so confident in my ability to deliver when the pressure is on. If you're a great person, people will give you opportunities, and then if you could deliver, that's how you maintain yourself at a high level, I think, in anything in life.
What's one last piece of advice for someone that wants to work in pro sports?
Diversify your skills. Don't be super niche in one thing early. I think find what your niche is, but test the waters. That's the absolute key. It takes a lot of work. At times it takes luck, but you need to try things, not listen to what someone else says. Because if I listened to what people told me when I was young, there is no way I would be where I am now. Don't be afraid to try and fail, because failure is the best way to learn. The measure of success is how one copes with disappointment. You can have an idea today, you don't necessarily achieve it. The thing I'm best at is handling disappointment. For every opportunity I've had, I can guarantee I've had 100 rejections. You start to extrapolate that a bit. I've had that many rejections over my career that the amount of knockbacks that I got, still get, it never ends. If you can get to a point where you can control your emotions and reactions to disappointment, take each and every one as an opportunity to learn, you will be so much better for it in anything you decide to pursue.
Massive thanks to Adriano, as we wish you the best in your football career. And please drop a like on the video, because if it wasn't for him, this video wouldn't be possible. But if you want to see more, check this interview out.